Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're very excited to have you here. This is, I think, our 9th or 10th Welcome to FAIR event, and we are just overwhelmed by how many people have expressed an interest in being part of the pro-human movement. My name is Bayan Bartning. I am the president of Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. I'm going to let Paul and Gavin introduce themselves. We're also going to have one other person joining today's session partway through, and I'll have her introduce herself maybe at the end of the presentation. And her name is Letitia Kim, who is the head of the FAIR Legal Network. I'm going to give about a 25-minute presentation, and we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So, Paul.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Rossi. I've been volunteering with FAIR since about the beginning of the year. It's been really exciting, and we're busily setting up the chapter networks across the country. I am a math teacher at Grace Church School in Manhattan. Recently wrote an article and am now in some hot water with my school, but it's all okay. I will not be returning there next year, but it's just been really fantastic volunteering my time for FAIR. So it's been great so far, and it's great to be here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gavin. I'm a recent college graduate, and I've been doing some work for FAIR recently. Greatly enjoying it. Believe in the cause, especially as a recent college student and less recent high school student. I saw some of the stuff really start to crop up, and seeing the sort of destination it's come to now. I think this is a very pressing cause, and I've greatly enjoyed working for it.
Great, thank you, Paul and Gavin. So as I mentioned, I'm going to go through a presentation, and then we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A in the end. And just a little bit about myself. I have 2 kids who are in 2nd grade and 4th grade. Until this fall, they were enrolled at a private school in New York City. And over the summer, I started seeing some messaging from the school that I found a little confusing. And starting in September, the school made it clear that it had embarked on a new mission. Instead of focusing on educating my children, it was focused on a new mission of anti-racism, which as somebody who is half Mexican and Yaqui on one side and half Jewish on the other side, I am definitely opposed to racism. I would say I am anti-racist in that anti-racism in the dictionary means opposed to racism. I am 100% opposed to racism. What I found is that the curriculum that the school had embraced was in fact racist. And that concerned me a great deal. So I started asking questions, I started speaking up, I started looking into the issue. And that's what led to the launch of the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. And at this point, we have around 20,000 people who have signed up to join since we launched about 7 weeks ago. And we're very excited to have all of you here on this call with us. So with that, I'm going to jump into presentation. And as Paul mentioned, if you have questions, there's a Q&A that you can submit questions through, and then there's a live chat that will stay open throughout this presentation. So I'm going to start with a short video. This is about 2 minutes long.
I'm Daryl Davis.
I'm Steven Pinker.
I'm John McWhorter.
I'm Barry Weiss.
I am Glenn Lowry.
I'm Melissa Chen.
I am Ayan Hirsi Ali.
I'm Zed Jelani.
I'm Coleman Hughes.
My name is Eli Steele, and I support FAIR.
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 Today, almost 70 years after Brown versus Board of Education ushered in the civil rights movement, there is an urgent need to reaffirm and advance its core principles.
To insist on our common humanity.
To advocate for fairness and understanding.
To demand that we are each entitled to equality under the law.
To bring about a world in which we are all judged by the content of our character and not by the color of our skin.
That's where FAIR comes in.
FAIR is the foundation against intolerance and racism.
FAIR gets that our civil rights and liberties need to be protected.
It's not enough just to be anti-racist. We also need to be pro-human, moving forward together as one race, the human race. Join FAIR in support of compassionate, pro-human anti-racism, rooted in our dignity and our common humanity.
Join us.
So I'm just going to highlight one of the quotes from that short video. And that's what Daryl Davis had to say, which is, it's not enough just to be anti-racist. We also need to be pro-human. And I'll talk in a few minutes about what we mean by pro-human, but I think that really sums up what FAIR is all about. FAIR is a nonpartisan organization. We do not see this as a left or a versus right issue. We see this as a backward versus forward issue. And we think that's important because we think that this belief system that we're going to talk about has found a home on the political left, which is why many people refer to it as a far left ideology. We don't see it as a left-wing ideology, and we don't think it has a home, should have a home anywhere. It's really a backward belief system, which is teaching that skin color determines the character and moral authority of a person. It's teaching that the only way to resolve conflict is through tyranny of the mob or public shaming or violence. It's teaching that people should live according to a different set of rules based on skin color and other immutable characteristics. And worst of all, it's teaching that people should be closed-minded. They should be fearful of people or ideas or questions even that challenge the beliefs of this new orthodoxy. And our view is that a better way is to move forward to a future where we realize the promise of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and Martin Luther King's dream of judging people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. And a world where we recognize that there is one human race and where the color of a person's skin, just like their eye color or their hair color, does not define their identity, their beliefs, their character, or their moral authority.
I'm Daryl.
Sorry. So one of the things that we're focused on at FAIR is reclaiming the language of morality. So I think, going back to my awakening to what was happening over the summer and into the fall of last year, one of the things that I was struck by is how surreal it was to hear these words, which are so powerful, like anti-racism, diversity, equity. Equity means fairness, right? Inclusion, belonging. All these words being used in ways that really perverted their meanings. And so one of the things that we think is very important as a movement is that we need to reclaim those words. We cannot allow those words to be redefined in that way. And so rather than rejecting the word equity, I would insist on using equity the way it's intended, which is that it means fairness, rather than rejecting the word diversity, right? Diversity is a beautiful thing. We need to make sure that we're standing up for real diversity. So a few words that I want to go over with you. One is the word pro-human, and this means advocating for one human race, universal civil rights and liberties, and compassionate anti-racism rooted in dignity and our common humanity. Anti-racist still means opposed to racism. And again, the definition has been perverted in some ways by some people, but that is what it means. And neo-racism is a word that was coined several decades ago. We've updated the definition slightly, but this is really the intent behind it when it was first developed. And it is a belief that race is a real and inescapable social construct that determines an individual's identity, agency, beliefs, ability, or culture, such that members of different race groups can never understand each other due to intrinsic and insurmountable cultural differences. And so this is a form of racism that acknowledges, on the one hand, that race is not real, that there is no scientific basis to race, because it acknowledges that there is one human race, but then it identifies people as being defined by their race, even though race is not real. And they're defined to such an extent that they cannot actually connect with each other. They cannot understand each other's lived experiences. And this is really synonymous with the new orthodoxy that we're dealing with. I'm gonna play another short video by a comedian named Ryan Long.
When me and Brad first met, I didn't think we'd get along, but turns out we kind of agree on everything. Your racial identity is the most important thing. Everything should be looked at through the lens of race.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke. We both have a lot of opinions about people of color, even though we barely know any.
I say colored people, but as long as we're classifying them, we both think minorities are a united group who think the same and act the same.
And vote the same. You don't want to lose your black card. Sorry, I don't know. I just think we should
roll back discrimination laws so we can hire based on race again. Jinx, now you owe me a Coke. Hey, tell them what you told me yesterday.
White actors should only do voices for white cartoon characters.
I've been saying that for years. Stick to your own.
Us white people, we have so much privilege.
I agree. It is a privilege to be white. Ask him about interracial dating.
All I said is that black men who date white women have internalized racism, and white men that date ethnic women are fetishizing them.
Guys against interracial dating now. Like, am I being pranked? Did Boomer put you up to this?
Ugh, you know that taco place is white owned?
White people should be making white foods, like Kraft macaroni and cheese, no seasoning, not even salt. It's like he's a mind reader. I mean, I've been pushing for segregation forever, and my man does what?
I created an improv comedy show exclusively for ethnic people.
Guy segregates comedy on my birthday.
White people need to stop wearing dreadlocks, and they need to stop appropriating black people's music.
Shaved heads and country music, the way God intended.
You know all white people are racist.
I'm listening.
Even if you have a black wife or a black friend group, you're still really racist.
You know, we just kicked a guy out of the organization for having a black girlfriend, but if you can promise me he's still really racist, we'll consider letting him back in. Black people should only shop at black businesses.
I guess the only thing we really disagree about is I think white people are the root of all evil.
But what did I tell you, though? If we can narrow that down to a certain group of tiny-hatted white people, I think we can come to an understanding.
Technically, I don't consider Jewish people white.
Neither do I.
So as you can see, there are a lot of similarities between neo-racism and racism. This slide is about the origins of the new orthodoxy. And for me, it represents, really my simplicity on the other side of complexity, to paraphrase Oliver Wendell Holmes. And I spent 3 months really trying to understand where this was coming from. How could teachers at my kids' school, how could the administrators at the school, and as I started to understand the problem, how could broad swaths of our society have embraced something that seems so obviously wrong? And this is my understanding after many conversations and a lot of research. And one of the things that we're working on at FAIR is to try to explain some of these concepts in very simple ways so that people can come up to speed on this in a lot less than the 3 months that it took me. But really at its core, this new orthodoxy is based on postmodernism, which is something that came from multiple people, but really if I had to pin it on one person, it would be Michel Foucault, who is a French philosopher. And in 1981, Time magazine named Michel Foucault the Prince of Power. They referred to the cult of Michel Foucault. He had a huge impact on American academia back in the late 70s, early 80s. And we'll talk in a minute about the new orthodoxy, but a lot of the underlying philosophy is postmodernism, is based on Michel Foucault's philosophy. That was overlaid with Stokely Carmichael's Black Power movement, and also intersectionality, which is more of a Marxist framework that we'll talk about. But those together are known as critical theory, and most commonly as critical race theory, which is one of many permutations of this new orthodoxy. And that by itself is not really dangerous and would not have the impact that I think it's had on our society. But what's been happening is for decades now, through a thought reform process, this theory, this critical theory, has been taught to college students as reality. And that same theory is now being taught to K through 12 students in workplaces, et cetera, as reality. So rather than presenting it as here's one way of seeing the world, it's presented as this is the way of seeing the world. So what is the New Orthodoxy? The New Orthodoxy is based on 5 principles. One is that power is truth. And this is an important one. This is saying that there is no objective reality, or no objective truth, and this is what leads to the idea that the only way to resolve conflict is through power or violence, or shaming or tyranny of the mob. Because if truth is subjective, then power is the only way to resolve any conflict. The second is that moral relativity is the concept of moral relativity, which is saying that there is no universal right and wrong, and that every socially constructed group or culture defines its own right and wrong, and we need to respect that. And so that leads to some interesting things around female genital mutilation in parts of Africa, and people who would embrace the New Orthodoxy would say, well, that's their decision, that's their culture, rather than thinking about the individual rights of the women who are being mutilated. And so obviously, it begs the question, well, what about those children who this is being done to? Did they have any say? And again, this is based on a socially constructed group and what the norms are of that group. And so that's where this moral relativity impacts individuals. The third is this concept of a perpetual zero-sum power struggle. And this is what really creates a lot of the conflict, because the Orthodoxy frames the world as a place where you have different groups of people who may not have even chosen to be in the group that they're in because it's socially constructed. And they are in perpetual conflict, where a gain for one group is a loss for another group. And so if you see the world as a place where you're part of a group and that group is in conflict with other groups, that is going to lead to conflict. Because if you see the world that way, it is going to lead to you interacting with the world in that way. The fourth is this concept of racial realism, which is saying that on the one hand, race is not a biological fact, but on the other hand, race is everything. And so you'll find that in a curriculum based on this orthodoxy, there will be a lesson on the fact that there is no scientific basis to race, but then the remaining 12 years is going to be spent on teaching people that race is real, race defines you, your identity is based on your race. The fifth is this concept of intersectional hierarchy of oppressions, which is a victim-oppressor framework, which is just stating that everyone is either a victim or an oppressor, or in some cases, they could be both. The moral code of the New Orthodoxy is very simple, and it is that your obligation, your only obligation, is to dismantle systems of oppression. And it defines systems of oppression as everything that was created by the dominant society, which is defined as whiteness or white supremacy. And so things like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the police, these are all defined as systems of oppression, even the education system. And so the focus of the new moral code is to dismantle those systems of oppression. And it's a bit vague on what it will replace it with, but that is really how you can be a good person, is to dismantle everything. If you are somebody in an oppressed group, if you are a person of color, then you are also obligated to dismantle the systems of oppression. And if you don't, you're a race traitor, which is where you see a lot of the vitriol really being directed at people who according to the New Orthodoxy, are in a victim group, who are actually standing up against the destruction of these systems. So why do we care about philosophy, right? Well, philosophy shapes our perception, and our perception shapes our reality. So if you think about it, this is a quote from Michel Foucault, which I think is worth repeating. My point is not that everything is bad, but that everything is dangerous, which is not exactly the same as bad. If everything is dangerous, then we always have something to do. So my position leads not to apathy, but to a hyper and pessimistic activism. And when I first read that, my immediate thought was, wow, that really describes what I'm seeing in the world today. There's a lot of hyper and pessimistic activism. And if you see the world as this zero-sum power struggle between groups, then of course you'll see things in a hyper and pessimistic way. So if that is your underlying philosophy, if that is the lens that you're seeing the world through, then it's not a surprise that somebody experiencing something in their life could come out of that experience feeling grievance and pessimism and despair, whereas somebody who's seeing the world through a more positive lens is going to come out of that experience with gratitude and optimism and hope. And the reason why we care about that, I mean, there are many reasons, but one is this concept of the psychology of thriving. And we know that positive character strengths, including gratitude and optimism, are incredibly powerful emotions. And they affect not only our mental health, but our physical health. And this is especially true for children. So gratitude is the quality of being thankful, readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness. Optimism, hopefulness and confidence about the future or the successful outcome of something. And if you're seeing the world through this pessimistic lens, this grievance-driven lens of this new orthodoxy, then that can lead to something called learned helplessness. And so, so what is this doing? This is really reprogramming people to be hyper and pessimistic activists. So this is just showing the concept of high school graduates in our society, in our country, who have been raised for the most part in homes where they are taught positive character strengths. They are taught to see the world through a lens of optimism and gratitude, because that's what's required to be a healthy, functioning human being. And after 4 years of thought reform in higher education, many of them are coming out with this more pessimistic lens of postmodernism and intersectionality. And as a parent, what really scared me, and the reason why I saw the need for FAIR, is that now we're taking that same thought reform process and we're bringing it to K through 12. So we have 5-year-olds who are being taught to identify based on skin color, literally. I mean, that's one of the first activities that they're doing is drawing their skin color, choosing a Pantone swatch, and naming their skin color. And that's the first step to race consciousness, and then collective collective guilt, collective whatever, but basically creating that concept of identity being equivalent to your skin color, as opposed to recognizing the uniqueness and value of every human being, every child in the classroom. So obviously as parents, in the case of dealing with our children, or as somebody in the workforce who's maybe encountering this, or just in your community, you may feel like you can manage this, and hey, I can take care of my kids even if this is being presented. I still think we need to care about this beyond that, because ultimately, even if you can protect your own children, as more people embrace this new belief system, what is this going to mean for our society? It's going to mean a society that is not anti-racist, but that is anti-character, anti-virtue, and anti-rational thinking, right? Because that's one of the fundamental premises of postmodernism and of this new orthodoxy, which is presented as anti-racist, but ultimately takes people down a path to becoming anti-rational thinkers. But around character strengths, this new orthodoxy is taking traditional character strengths, traditional virtues, and it's flipping them on their head. So things like fairness, which is generally recognized as meaning everyone lives by the same set of rules. The new orthodoxy is saying, no, everyone needs to live by different rules based on their status in the intersectional hierarchy of oppressions. If you look at things like forgiveness, right? The new orthodoxy is actually teaching the opposite, that we should not forgive, we should never forget. In terms of hope, it's teaching despair And in terms of optimism, it's teaching, instead of optimism, it's teaching pessimism. So what are we going to do about this? So FAIR is focused on a multi-pronged effort to shift our culture forward and stand up for people affected by this new orthodoxy. Our mission is to advocate for civil rights and liberties and a common culture based on fairness, understanding, and humanity. And there are 3 areas of focus. One is to educate people. So we want to educate people about the new orthodoxy and about the pro-human movement. So that will include videos, different material, op-eds, et cetera, but just we are focused on raising awareness with the general public. We also think that it's incredibly important to have positive pro-human options for any institution, any school, any workplace that wants to embrace a DEI program. So, we don't think that it's inherently bad to have diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's actually a great focus for an organization to have if that's what they choose to do. We want to make sure that if they do that, that FAIR has an option which is actually going to promote positive pro-human values instead of be a Trojan horse for postmodernism and intersectionality. The second area of focus is empowering people. So we are focused on bringing people together to focus collectively on positive change. And we're doing that through a network of chapters that we are in the process of setting up. And within that chapter network, what we're focused on is having training programs that will help chapter members be effective advocates, whether it's for their children or for themselves. So I think one little anecdote here that was a surprise to me when I learned it is that Rosa Parks, who is known for refusing to sit on the back of the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, did not do that spontaneously. That was something that came after 10 weeks of training. I think that it's important for people to be equipped with the tools to be effective messengers, to be effective advocates. So that's something that we're focused on. And the third area of focus for FAIR is to advocate. So we are focused on advocating for people standing up for them publicly, but also providing legal support. So since Letitia was not here at the beginning of the call, I'm actually going to have Letitia talk for a minute about herself and then also a little bit about the FAIR Legal Network.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. My name is Letitia Kim, and I am the Managing Director of the Legal Network. I joined FAIR in March, shortly after it was launched, in order to assemble and manage the network of independent attorneys who will be taking on and perhaps, if necessary, litigating the cases that FAIR determines to platform. I've also been doing a variety of other legal things at FAIR. We're all extremely passionate about FAIR's mission and purpose and very eager to make substantial changes.
Thanks, Letitia. So just to recap, we are modeling our efforts on Martin Luther King's nonviolent civil rights movement. We think it's extremely important to bring a positive pro-human message. We think you fight fire with water, not with fire. We are focused on constructing, on building things and not deconstructing or dismantling, tearing down things. We are focused on moving our society, our culture forward, not backward. And we think it's extremely important that as a movement, we are reclaiming the language of morality and the moral high ground. And I think that that's actually one thing that's incredibly important, is that we are helping people feel confident in their own philosophy, their own moral code, and that we are helping people feel more confident to speak up and to end the spiral of silence. So I think that that's an incredibly important part of what we're doing. And so you'll see that through example, we're speaking up. I mean, I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Paul has been very outspoken. I think there are many people involved with FAIR who over the coming months are going to be speaking up as well. And we're trying to help other people find the courage to speak up, because ultimately the more people who speak up, the more quickly this backward belief system will fall like the house of cards that it is. And the last thing is we are focused on helping people be effective advocates for themselves and for their children. This is just a screenshot of our board of advisors, which I think probably everyone on this has seen. I'm going to end the slideshow here, and we can open it up to Q&A.
Okay, so we've gotten several really great questions coming in. I'll try to highlight the ones that have been asked multiple times. This is a good one. One thing that seems really pressing when trying to talk about a universal humanism is the need for a shared political identity. In the US, this has long been an American identity from the left-wing perspective. Is the goal of FAIR to reintroduce this identity or try to create something new? Is it possible to create such an identity at an international level?
So I'm not quite sure that I have a quick answer to that, but I would say that our focus is on helping people stand up for their own identity and to not let this new belief system reformat and replace your operating system or the operating system of your kids with its belief system, with its philosophy. So I think that we firmly believe in a pluralistic society where there are many different religions, many different belief systems that coexist peacefully. And we are adamantly opposed to having a new orthodoxy that is intent on replacing all of those.
Here's a question from Mars. He asks, as a liberal, I really like to believe there is a powerful and substantial silent majority against the illiberal/woke left, but my anecdotal experience makes me doubt this. Is there any substantial data to state that this is true?
Here's what I'd say. There is data to support that this is a minority viewpoint. And there's a study, I think it's about 2 years old. Maybe Paul, you could put it in the chat, which was looking at political tribes, and the tribe that would be most comparable to the new orthodoxy is about 8% of the population, or at least was several years ago. I think what we're seeing right now is effectively what's called the tipping point, which some studies have said at the point where you have 10% of the population that believes passionately, dogmatically in a new idea, a new belief system, and you have the remainder of the population which is open-minded, to the extent that they will accept that new belief system, that creates a cascade where that idea can then take over that culture. So I think we're seeing some of that happening. And so obviously we need to prevent that from happening, because we don't want to see this orthodoxy grow above that 10% number. But, I think it is relatively low. I think in certain communities, in certain circles, it is probably higher than that, right? So if it's 10% of the population, it could be within the artistic community, it could be higher than that. Within media, it's definitely higher than that. Within academia, it's higher than that. So I think that it's probably more prevalent within the quote unquote educated elite of the country. So that it just may be that in your particular circle, you're seeing more people who have embraced this. But I would not despair. I think that even people who have embraced this belief system, I think are ultimately, as long as they haven't completely closed off their ability to have rational thinking or rational thought, I think as people start to speak up and as the spiral of silence ends, I think that you're going to see that I'm gauging it's 80% plus of the population that is sane and understands how dangerous this kind of closed-minded, anti-science, anti-rational thinking belief system is. So I would encourage everyone to be optimistic and hopeful about this.
Here's a question. I Another question. I am a federal government employee and I'm currently serving in my office's Diversity and Inclusion Council, the Education and Training Subcommittee. My main goal right now as a member of FAIR is to identify pro-human training materials that I can share with the committee in order to steer it away from neo-racist ideas and messages. Has FAIR produced such materials, or does anyone have recommendations for where to find materials that have already been made?
Paul, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, as far as we are working to develop an ethnic studies curriculum, which should be, hopefully out by the summer. And I think there's also training materials, DEI training materials that make sense that we're also working on. Is that right, Bayan?
Correct. So we're working on training for corporations, as well as an ethnic studies curriculum. We have Adam Seagrave and Stephanie Shonikin, who have Race in the American Story, which is a college level course, which is based on, I would say, a pro-human approach to dealing with historical wrongs that have happened with regard to race in the United States. So I would call it a warts and all look at American history, but one that gives people a sense of optimism and hope and understanding that ultimately the Bill of Rights and the Constitution are what have helped us to move past these issues, as opposed to being systems of oppression. So I think I'm very excited about that curriculum. It'll be a K through 12 curriculum. And then also workplace training as well. So that, and then there are other options available. There's Chloe Valdary, Theory of Enchantment, I think is a great program. There's Irshad Manji's Moral Courage Project. So I think there are other, and I think there are a few others I can't think of off the top of my head, but there are multiple organizations, multiple people, I think, developing curriculum and training programs that would be consistent with a pro-human approach, which we're really excited about.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that in reaching out to a lot of different people in the States, I've been in touch with several professionals in diversity training that, they've been around for a long time and they watched their own industry get taken over by critical race theory. And so they were displaced by this ideology in their own workplace. So they can also, I think, contribute, and we want to get them more involved. Here's a good question about the meaning of equity. And there are a couple questions about this. In essence, don't we have to dispute the word equity as it's being used to replace the word equal? How can we take back this word and call it fairness when it seems to mean something very different from equality or fairness? Equality is a great brand. Everyone can get behind it, but equity is tainted. Should we push equality instead of equity?
So I can understand that sentiment, and I think that that's what the people who have pushed this orthodoxy understand that as well. And I think it's a tactic that has been used over and over again very successfully to take words that have so much power, make them tainted to some people, some portion of the population, but actually a minority of the population, and then get them to stop using it. I think that the challenge is if we allow that to happen with words like equity, anti-racism, it forces us to have a conversation on the terms that the people who are pushing the orthodoxy want to have it on, which is if you just listen as somebody who's a normal person, right? A person who is busy with work, busy with their kids, politically somewhat disengaged, just wants to keep their head down, doesn't want to get in trouble. And they hear one person saying, I don't like equity, I don't like anti-racism. They start to sound like they are a racist person who doesn't want fairness, right? So I think it's very important that we don't seed those words, because I understand on an intellectual level, I've seen the thing saying, oh, equality versus equity. I'm for equality, I don't like equity. I like equity. I like equity because equity means fairness. But it is not equity to discriminate against people based on their skin color, right? To judge people by the color of their skin and not the content of their character. So I think what it does is by us not seeding those words, it allows us to force a conversation about what do those words really mean. And so we can, when we're having a conversation, when we're having a dialogue, remember there's a large group of people who are really an audience to that conversation. It forces that conversation to focus on the definitions of those words, which I think is a word that is something that we can ultimately win, because I think the reason why those words are powerful is because equity means fairness. And I think most people have a positive association with the word because of that. And so us giving up on that word gives an incredible amount of power to people who are pushing a really, backward and discriminatory belief system.
Great. There's a question here that that I thought I would answer myself. Are there ways through FAIR to find and network with parents within your school or school system? And this is a really important question, and I think it's one of the ways that FAIR can help the most. As we build out the chapters, and we have various types of chapters. We have state level chapters, regional chapters. In some cases, we'll have local chapters for large cities, and we're building mini sites for each of these chapters. And as part of the contact form on those sites, we're going to have a place where you can enter your school so that, then we can act as a clearinghouse to connect parents within that school. We've just started piloting this with the New York City arm of the New York City FAIR chapter, independent schools arm. And we'd like to roll it out once we get it working well. We'd like to roll it out across the country. It really is important because so many parents don't know if there are other parents or teachers or even administrators that feel the way they do, and it's very difficult to reach out given the risks involved. So that's something we really want to make happen sooner rather than later. Also, some questions about the slides. Will the slides be made available in any form? It says confidential, but people really think they're great and would like to get a copy of them.
Yes, we're working on that. And we're also working on some videos based on the content of the slides. For those who don't want to go through a presentation, we'll have some videos available as well. There was a question about starting chapters based on a college or university affiliation, and that's something that we are working on as well. So we're looking at campus chapters as well as geography-based chapters, and then we also have an independent school set of chapters as well. And then we're looking at networks of professional communities. So what we want to do is create various ways for people to come together, because I think ultimately this is about people finding each other. And there is huge strength in numbers. And I think that's how we ultimately prevail.
Here's a question maybe Letitia can answer by Steve. The whole CRT ideology strikes me as patently unconstitutional, using the government to enforce equal outcomes, treating people differently based on race, 14th Amendment in parentheses, as well as violations of the Civil Rights Act. I'm curious about the legal strategies that are evolving to push back.
Hi, thanks. That's a great question. In many cases, yes, it does violate equal protection and the First Amendment of the Constitution when it's being done by public institutions, such as public schools and government organizations. The legal vehicles that we envision using in order to challenge critical race theory include the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which applies to education, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which applies to employers, including private employers who have more than about 15 employees. And possibly, in some cases, applicable state anti-discrimination laws.
Here's a good follow-up question. Thank you, Letitia. Is there a legally protected way of refusing to participate in an anti-racism training at work or in school?
Yes, well, it depends on how you construe legally legally protected. I suppose if you work for a public employee, they would have different standards, and it would be more difficult for them to compel you to engage in any kind of training that your personal conscience, finds repugnant. Certainly, it would be a First Amendment violation if a public employee were to require you to assert certain principles that you disagree with. Private employers are a little bit different because they're not subjected to the rigors of the Constitution. So they do have more leeway, and most employers can fire you for any reason or no reason, as long as it's not, you're not in a certain protected class, i.e. race, sex, etc. But I would say that, any employer who would actually do that and would have consequences for not participating in such of these trainings based on objections of personal conscience, one has to consider whether one really wants to be in a workplace like that.
Here's a question from Nels. Until training materials are available, could FAIR make available appropriate questions to get people thinking or questioning the new orthodoxy? This is a really great question. We are very close to releasing our first version of the advocacy toolkit, which has chapters that can, help with that. We have a chapter on how to talk to a critical theorist, a step-by-step guide for teachers, what to expect at a school board meeting many school boards will offer Q&A sessions when they start to push CRT into schools. And so at those sessions, you can engage in that way. There's a recommended reading list, a step-by-step guide for parents, and how to really converse effectively with someone with whom you really disagree. So that should be really coming out soon, and we're going to make that available to members, hopefully within the next week or so.
Yeah, this week, I think, Paul, is
this week. Okay, great. And I know we'll include that in the newsletter, right?
Yeah, and it's in the member section of the website. So if you click on the member login, I think it is the section on the website, you have to register with a username and password, and then you'll have access to that as it's available. And also the recording of these webinars those are up there as well. So if anyone wants to share it with any friends or watch it again, that information will be up there as well. There are a couple of questions. I'm just going to go through a few quick that I'm looking at here. Somebody asked if there have been public attacks against FAIR. Has the media attempted to smear the group or its members? So far we haven't seen a lot of that. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm encouraged by is that, I think as I spoke up, as Paul spoke up, as I've seen other people speak up, I think there are far more people coming out in support. I didn't see a lot of trolling. I don't think Paul's seen that either. I think a lot of people are just really glad to see people speaking up for the truth. And I think, we've actually started to generate some interest from media outlets that are generally have not been covering this issue. So, my opinion may change on this as that coverage comes out, but I think that I think it just supports the idea that there are a lot of people who recognize that this is not right, and that this new orthodoxy is not right, and are open to at least hearing out alternative opinions. And then there was a question about the FAIR partnering with Heterodox Academy. We are very, very much focused on doing that. So yes, we are focused on doing things with Jonathan Haidt and with others at Heterodox Academy. And somebody asked a question, how did we get here where discrimination is considered okay again? And I think it just comes down to what we talked about in this presentation. It's this postmodernist mindset which allows for a suspension of rational thinking, and I think that's really what's driving it.
There's another question here that's, I think, a good one and something we should really think about. The US and Europe do have a very messed up and painful history with race, and the echoes of that history probably do have an impact on current outcomes. but that doesn't mean that we have to swallow the new orthodoxy, critical race theory, and Kendi-style racism. In order to be taken seriously, though, FAIR must acknowledge the problems with the status quo. Does FAIR have any viewpoints or statements on the data or meaning behind current racial disparities?
You know, I think as an organization, you know, I would say, and as an individual, I would say that disparity, inequity is real. That not everybody has equal opportunity in our society, and that is something that as an American, as a human being, I think we need to address. And I think that I would say, you know, to my knowledge, everyone involved with FAIR feels the same way. I think it's just pretty obvious that, you know, that equality of opportunity, you know, requires that people have certain things which is not always accessible to them, like a quality education. You know, I think that our view would also be that destroying our public education system and eliminating any opportunities for charter schools and you know, and magnet schools is going to have the opposite impact of what's needed. So I think that I would look at what's the impact versus the intent. And I think even if people who are advocating these policies have the right intent, I don't think that the impact is going to be beneficial to anyone. You know, so ultimately I would say that that inequality is real. And I think that from a socioeconomic standpoint, you know, there are disparities at the quote unquote race level. I think ultimately though, the focus of programs should be on how can we do a root cause analysis to understand what's driving that and not lose our rational thinking and focus on programs that are going to address root cause issues. Paul, would you add anything to that?
No, that's pretty good. I was just looking at some other questions here. This is, let's see. Great. Are there specific ways that ordinary members can support the leadership of FAIR? I think the best way to do that is really at this point, because we're trying to build a national network from the ground up, and we've had 20,000 people sign up with us, and we've had, I think at this point, 3,500 volunteers, people, you know, sign up to volunteer, and that's a tremendous way to do it. When we select and vet all the chapter leaders for the states and regions, being available to jump in when you get that call or you get that email from those chapter heads and is going to be how you can help us the most, because, you know, right now we're just busy setting up these state chapters, and then you know, donating your time. So many people have donated, you know, 5, 10, 15 hours a week, and that's just tremendous. And so the more that you can do once we get connected, it's going to might take a little while, like maybe as much as 2 or 3 weeks before someone contacts you, but we will contact you. And I just have to urge you to be patient. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with, you know, emailing info@fairforall.com or paul@fairforall.com or Bayan or, you know, Letitia@fairforall.com. With any questions you may have, because we'll definitely be able to get back to you in the interim.
I saw in the chat somebody was recommending Harrison Bergeron, which I think I would echo that recommendation, and I think that's really, you know, one of the issues. My wife is from the former Soviet Union, and I can tell you that that this obsession with equality of outcome, you know, as we can see, means that we're lowering everyone to a specific standard, and that's a huge concern. So I think that's, you know, I still would emphasize that the word equity is not a word that we can abandon, because it's a powerful word.
Here's a question. Will FAIR take a stand or make a position on school choice or homeschooling?
I'm not sure. I mean, we're not taking a position on school choice. Homeschooling, I think definitely if FAIR would say if people want to homeschool, they should homeschool. And obviously, if your school has embraced a curriculum that you as a parent do not agree with, and homeschooling is an option, then I think that's a great option to choose personally. But I think school choice, maybe outside there are specific issues like that I don't know that FAIR will take a position on. At this point, I can definitively say we have not taken a position on school choice. And I think part of this is to, really define a mission and an agenda which has a broad group of people who can get behind. So, rather than being narrowly focused on a set of issues that become political or partisan in nature, we want to focus on our mission of civil rights and liberties and a common culture of fairness, understanding, and humanity. And to the extent that school choice is a derivative of that, we would get behind it or oppose it. I don't think we would oppose it, but I think that it's something that I'm sure quite a few people involved with FAIR will support school choice. I don't know that as an organization, it's something we would advocate for. I think there are plenty of organizations that are advocating for that, though.
A lot of people asking about Canada. Will there ever be a Canadian chapter? And what can FAIR do to have chapters internationally? Is that on the table?
Yes, so Canada is definitely on the table. We've been approached about the UK, Australia, I think really every English-speaking country, and France of all places as well. So I think it's definitely something that we will be supporting and supporting the creation of FAIR affiliates in other countries. And Canada is definitely top of the list.
There's a question about donors. Will FAIR be transparent about where its funding is coming from?
Yes, I mean, FAIR is, we're a new organization. We have, at this point, about 1,000 donors who have contributed. We've raised around $3 million total, which has enabled us to start hiring a professional team. At this point, we've been volunteers. I will continue to volunteer my time. In starting the organization, I made a commitment to never taking a penny from FAIR. And I've put some of my money into this to get it off the ground. Letitia is also a volunteer. Paul has been a volunteer. Gavin's a volunteer. I think many of us will continue to be volunteers, but we're also going to start hiring people as well. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think we've got time for one more question, unless you see anything you want to answer, Brian or Letitia. It's about, how do you get in touch with your chapter heads? I think what we'll do is once we get them settled within a chapter, we'll be able to segment our data by zip code so that we can actually send out an email directing you to your chapter head. And that'll really help the process of getting connected and getting the various networks linked up. So please be patient, wait for that. I'm going to put the link in the chat to how to become a member on the site, so you can get a copy of this welcome webinar and also join the forums. So I'll do that right now.
Great. I'm just going to cover two more questions, and then we're going to have to end it because we're 2 minutes over. The first is, does FAIR envision playing a role by engaging with major corporations? Yes, that's something that we're definitely focused on, is offering a pro-human DEI option for corporations. So and also holding corporations accountable when they are offering, what I would call bad DEI. And then will FAIR defend parents and children in private schools? Definitely. We're focused on public schools, private schools, workplace, community organizations, nonprofits, cultural organizations. So private schools are definitely part of that as well. And I think that's actually been, from my experience, a lot of the private schools I think have embraced this much more quickly than many public schools. So I think, I've seen personally a lot of private school parents really, getting involved and being motivated to deal with this issue. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. We're really excited to have you as part of the pro-human movement. And as Paul was saying, feel free to reach out. We are working through all of the people who have reached out already. If you have something urgent that you want to contact us about, then I would encourage you to email info@fairforall.org or membership@fairforall.org, and we will get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.